Hey everybody, I'm Jane.
And I'm Sarah.
And you're listening to the Medium Curious Podcast, the show that wonders, is every day the Day of the Dead?
It is. That's what Perdita Finn says.
Yes, she does.
She is coming on today. She's the brilliant author of Take Back the Magic, Conversations with the Unseen World.
Today we have conversations with the unseen world and the seen world, and it's magical. So yeah, that's about right.
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. Miss Perdita, thank you for being here with us. We are huge fans.
I'm fans of yours, and I am really delighted to be here. I think I said to you, I help ordinary people have everyday encounters with those on the other side. But I am indebted to all of my friends who are psychics and mediums for both validating those experiences and helping to other people to access them. And, if our culture was right side up, which it most definitely is not, we would really be honoring and consulting those among us who could speak directly with the other side. So thank you for the work you're doing in the world.
Oh, we'll just start out by crying. Thank you, Perdita. That means so much.
Well, I have read your book, Take Back the Magic, Conversations with the Unseen World, and it's like at the top of my list as all-time favorite books. It takes off all the boxes for me. And I not only listened to you read it, which was such a gorgeous narration, I also went and bought the book after listening to you because I needed to have it in print.
So you could highlight it and make notes.
But can you tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Sure. I sometimes say, who am I? I'm an animal. I'm an animal trying to remember how to be an animal again. And I live in the Catskill Mountains, and the Catskills have always been known as a liminal land, an in-between place. And it was such a place for the indigenous people who lived here, who actually didn't live in Woodstock, which is where I live. They came here for ceremony and ritual, and they came here to honor the dead. And the line of mountains that I can see from right where I'm sitting was called the Wall of the Manitou, dividing the land of the living from the land of the dead. And so it was really the in-between place. I am committed to helping people remember that the unseen world is real and that everything on the other side of the veil is waiting to guide us and help us and love us. And if we can begin to access those lost relationships, a lot of what feels upside down in our world today will begin to feel right side up. So,
wow, we could be done.
So beautiful.
So beautiful. Well, one of the things I love in your books and in your teachings is the idea of the long story.
We are many, many beings. We all have many, many names within us. We all have many lives within us. I sometimes ask people to remember third grade or, whatever grade you were in when you were like 10 years old. And how many days, actual days, whole days of third grade do you remember? I remember two.
I do. I have at least
That's
one.
Impressive.
Right.
I don't have any whole days.
I remember Andy Lally jumping out the window after getting in a fight with the teacher. That was very exciting and dramatic. And then I also remembered this moment when I got 100 on a math test and the student teacher made a circle on my paper of correct mark. Everything is 100% correct. And a thrill went through my body. Just like, it wasn't just about having done the math right, which I would never do again, but it was about never happened again. But it was about the beauty of the circle she made on my paper. And it was many, many years later when I was studying Zen, and I was a Zen student, that I realized that, that is an experience that's often talked about in Zen. It's called the creation of the Enso, the perfect circle. And that one can create it. One can create a spiritual experience in the watcher. And I had it. And I realized that it was tapping into a past life experience for me. Now so let me talk about past lives and how I think about
Please.
them, and why I talk about the long story of our souls rather than reincarnation. I often find that when we talk about reincarnation, we get stuck in human binaries. I was this, I was that, and I think the long story is weirder than that and more fun. Let me talk about how I think it's weird. Okay. So imagine your soul is a thread, and I don't know if it's a gold thread or a red thread or a blue thread, and it's coming up through the veil and back down through the veil and up through the veil. And some of those stitches are so tiny, and some of those stitches are very big, and sometimes they'll cross. I don't know if you've ever, I used to, I was a nerdy little kid and I did embroidery. I loved embroidery. And my kind of little house fantasies. And, when you do embroidery, what you notice is on one side of the cloth, you're beginning to create a picture, right? You're beginning to fill in something. You're beginning to create a garden of flowers or, a beautiful forest scene. And the back just kind of looks like a mess. It's like knots and threads and loose ends and weird things that don't seem to go anywhere. It all makes sense on the other side. And I think that what we experience as human beings is that we experience the back of a cloth.
Yeah.
We don't see the big picture. We don't know how all of these stitches fit together to create what we call reality or the cosmos. And each stitch is a life. People sometimes ask me, how can I pray to the dead if the dead are reborn? And the way I like to think about it is if you start to pull on individual threads, you're going to set that fabric moving in different ways depending on what thread you pull on.
That's so true.
So like my mother's been dead since 2002. She's been dead for 22 years. I miss her very much. I work with her all the time. There's not a day she doesn't show up for me and that we don't collaborate on some little project together. But my mom, I miss her so much. I have a very clear sense that I'm about to meet my mother's reincarnation. And I have met friends who've come back. I've had that experience a number of times. And it's a very sacred experience. And I've made mistakes with it and I've learned how to manage it. And my husband has too. Sometimes we think it's maybe our primary work in life. But I have a sense that I will meet my mother's reincarnation. But that will be a new stitch for her soul. And the old stitch of my mother, Patricia, who died at 81, bourbon in one hand, cigarette in another.
Yeah. Love her.
We'd had its problems.
Of course, I relate.
But she's still there. She's still there. That stitch that I knew is still there. And then there may be another stitch. And there were stitches before that. We've had lifetimes of engagement together. And I think that what you begin to feel is when we speak about the long story is we can think of reincarnation as a very linear event. And the problem with a lot of the reason life feels so wrong side around is that we live in straight lines. And if you look in nature, nature doesn't live in straight lines. Nature lives in circles. Beautiful circles of return and reunion so that we're all always coming back to each other, always returning to each other, always finding each other again. And, the moon waxes and wanes. We live on a round planet circling a round sun in a round galaxy that's probably orbiting around dark matter in ways we can't even perceive or understand. Rain goes up and rain comes down. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like everything, the first law of science is nothing goes anywhere. Matter is matter. And if nothing goes anywhere, what does that mean for our souls? What does that mean about love?
Perdita, you tell this story in your book about being aware of a spirit when you were nursing your baby, when you were nursing your son. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Absolutely. It was right after we had moved to Woodstock. It was this time of year. And he was a delicious baby. He was, he was just made of butter and gold, and he very sweet. And we have a big open house in this sort of liminal realm. But he loved to nurse and rock. And it was late at night, and I was down in the rocking chair downstairs, and my daughter was asleep upstairs. My husband was asleep. All the lights were off in the house, and I was rocking him in front of the fire. He'd fallen asleep, but I didn't want to move him. I don't want him to wake up. And I was also just enjoying the feeling of his body against mine, his heartbeat against mine, and this feeling of blessing that, what did I do in a past life to deserve this being? You know what I mean? Like, which I still feel on a daily basis. And I'm sitting there feeling all this, and it's very quiet and dark. And all of a sudden, I had a sense of a woman standing beside me on my left, the dark shape of a woman. And it was real. And it was really intense. And I don't, unlike you, I'm not psychic medium. And I got freaked. You know what I mean? Like, if I hadn't been holding the baby, I would have screamed. And if the baby hadn't fallen asleep, I would have screamed.
But she knew that.
And you know how it is when a baby's
You
just
do not make a
wake this kid up.
She knew that.
She was smart.
I didn't do anything. And I just, my every cell in my body is prickling, and the goosebumps are just going wild. And this thought comes up in my head and it goes, who are you? And I knew the answer even as I asked the question. I don't know how to tell you. I can't prove to you how I know what I know. But I knew that it was my son's mother from another life. And I could feel her love. And I could feel her looking at him and knowing and remembering what it felt like to hold him. And that her longing for him, like so much passed between us in that moment, which was, it is a blessing to hold him in your arms. I've held him in my arms, I know. And I had a sense she'd lost him. I don't know how. I'd had a sense that their relationship had been one of loss and sorrow. Whether she had died or he had died, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have any information. What I knew at that moment was that she loved him. And I said it, I've had this moment where I thought, what do I do? This was before I was really formally working with the dead in really profound ways. I was already working with the dead a little bit, but not like this. And I just thought, oh, you want to hold him? Of course, I'm going to let you hold him. And then I said, but you have to protect him. You have to keep it safe.
Yeah.
You have to be his mother on the other side.
Yep.
You have to be his fairy godmother. I need to be able to call on you when I can't be there. I need you to watch him when I can't watch him. We've got to be a team. Okay.
Yeah. You gave her a job.
Yeah, I gave her. And this is when I really tapped into what I do with the dead, which is I always give the dead a job. And some people are very frightened when they have encounters with the dead. A woman wrote me today, and she was very frightened by an encounter with the dead. And I said, well, give them a job and send them on a quest and tell them not to walk into your house until they've answered the job, and then they can return if you want.
So why are people so scared? Why do you think?
If you'd like to, so anyway, I gave this woman a job, and she has shown up for me again and again and again. But why are some people so scared? Why was I scared? Why, tomorrow is Halloween. Why are people so scared? Why are our airwaves filled with horror movies? Why is the ubiquitous image a hand coming up through the grave that's going to pull us down into the crypt,
Silly question. It was a silly question.
the world is designed to make us terrified of such encounters, right?
Right.
And the question would be why? And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be that everybody was in conversation with the other side. Some people were really good at it, like you guys. But everybody could get along in those conversations. Everyone knew how to speak to the dead. And then as religion emerged, and religion only emerges, religion is a new invention. And it really emerges, and by religion, I'm talking about an organized system with an ideology and a police enforcement, which are priests. Priests and priestesses are all about enforcing an ideology. And they're also about mediation. They're also about saying, you can't talk to the dead. You can't talk to the divine. We can, but you can't. We can tell you what they're saying. You can't understand what they're saying. And it's about control and domination, which is what begins to happen to us as a people. And in order to assert that domination, the priests from the very beginning began demonizing conversations with the dead. So you will find letters that are 4,000 years old, the priests writing to each other. So how do we get those damn women to stop going to the graveyard, stop talking to their grandmothers? Because they won't listen to us. They'll only listen to the dead. And that really becomes profound before what we call the modern world begins in the witch burnings. The witch times, we often think that the people who were killed and accused of being witches were, herbalists and midwives, which was certainly true. But the single crime that women were most often accused of was speaking to the dead.
Well, that might explain why we were so scared to come out, Sarah.
Yeah.
Really explains it. Before my book came out, I think I've processed all this stuff. I've studied all this stuff. I've really done all this work, right? Like I talk about all this stuff. 2 weeks before my book came out, I got covered in the nastiest rash you've ever seen from head to toe. Like my whole skin was on fire.
Yeah.
Oh no.
And it took me a week to realize, I'm on fire.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right.
And the moment I realized that, and I did the moment I realized that everything began to dissipate. But it was as if my body was telling me, like, I know you're doing this. I know you're coming out, in full woo-woo, but you're scared and it's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I still have family members who have not acknowledged the book I wrote. No eye contact. No eye contact.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, I know. I call it the 80-yard stare, when I tell someone what I do and they look over my shoulder and I go, anyway, and then they're gone.
and yet, there was an era before civilization when people who did what you did would be honored, would be fed and clothed and loved and sought out and consulted for moments of crisis, right?
Yeah. Yep. That's why we're going back, Perdita.
We are.
With your book.
No, we are, and we're going to need it because things are moving out of control.
Yeah.
Right? We do. How do we strengthen our own intuition in these moments of chaos?
Yes.
So is talking to the dead, creating this relationship, strengthening your intuition? Can you tell us like the benefits of doing this? And can you repair relationships? I know that you talk about your dad and
So
your relationship with him.
I begin every morning consulting the dead. I fret, I worry. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a pet owner. I live in a small town in America. I have a lot of things I'm worried about. Okay.
Amen, sister.
From potholes to, the skin rash on my Cocker Spaniel. So, and I have a whole team on that. When what I do is I worry and fret And then I call in specific individuals from the other side to help me. I am reminded to think of this. So I am reminded that 2 years ago when I was working on my book before it came out, the design team at my publisher sent along a cover idea that was doo-doo. And it really so upsetting. And I went into a full hissy fit. And I thought, what am I going to do? How do I get them to realize this isn't the cover we want? Like, covers matter. People do judge books by their cover.
And I do love the cover. It's so good.
Okay, so how did we get there? How did we get there? I, for whatever reason, went to my ancestor altar and I thought, I'm looking around. I'm going, who am I going to call? Who are you going to call? And then I remembered Mr. Mello, Richard Mello. Richard Mello was my 8th grade art teacher. He was a giant, wonderful man who sat at the center of the art room, which was the center of our middle school building. And he was the DJ at our school dances, and he advised the newspaper. And he was this gregarious, the whole world constellated around him in junior high. I don't know if he was a great artist, but he was a great human being. Mr. Mello, are you still alive? And I went and I looked him up. He had died on that day, very day, 3 years earlier. This is how it often works when you work with the dead. Like, he pops into my head. So I look at him, okay, Mr. Mello, this is your job. Get me my cover. I'm not in charge. You're in charge. Work with the team. I want a cover that draws everyone in the way you drew everybody in. I don't know if you've seen the cover of my book.
It's gorgeous. I wish I had it at arm's length.
That was the second. Charlotte Day is the English artist they ended up hiring to do the cover. It's just ecstatically beautiful. It's like you want to walk into it, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing I said is, it just doesn't feel magical yet. Let it feel magical. And Mr. Miller, please, please, please inspire them.
Oh, he did. He did such a good job.
I have to buy a car. I have to go to the doctor. I have to get a human being on the phone. I have to solve some bureaucratic screw up. I call in someone from the other side. Now, you asked me about difficult dead people. Yeah. My whole book is about how I healed my relationship with my father and how I went from someone who had cut me out of his will. It takes a lot of work to cut your kids out of your will, by the way.
That's pretty precise.
You don't do it casually.
It's not an accident. Whoops.
Oh, no. You need clause after clause after clause after clause to do it. Each one, another knife in the heart. So how did we come back from that moment? How can I tell you that my father on the other side of the veil has been the most generous and loving of fathers? He has brought me royalty checks for books I never imagined. He has brought me unexpected windfalls. He makes all kinds of magic happen in my life. One of the things, for a long time, I prayed to him about money, because that was where I'd really felt like he was a really stingy guy. He was a doctor, he had plenty of money, but he was really stingy in a way that was unpleasant and unkind. And so I prayed to him a lot about money. And then I realized that one of the reasons my father was so resentful and stingy was he had wanted, when he was a young man, to be a poet, a writer. But as the eldest child of immigrants, he had to be a doctor. There were it wasn't an option. He couldn't imagine coming home and saying to his parents, yeah, I'm going to live, the life of itinerant poet. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't defy convention. And so he was frustrated and resentful. And it was a couple of years ago when I realized my father, who died 14 years ago, what's he, a 13-year-old boy now? And I thought of that 13-year-old boy, and I wondered if he wanted to be a poet still. And I thought he probably did. And I prayed for that boy and to that boy. And I told him, I said, you brought me so much. We've done so much work together. I hope you can remember your last lifetime as a doctor, because all of that knowledge about people and the body and anatomy that you learned is going to infuse your writing in this life. People are going to read your writing and go, this boy has wisdom.
Yeah.
He can be the poet he always wanted to be. And I pray for him almost every day that way. And I pray, I now say that my father is the patron saint of making a living at the arts.
Oh. Can we call him too?
Like right now?
All his name is Matthew Charles Finn. And you may call on him, and he would love it. And he has helped my daughter, my son, my nephews, a lot of my friends. He wants to show people that you don't have to give up your dreams. And he wants to help you making a living following your dreams.
That's so beautiful.
Okay, this is the third time I'm crying in this call so far. You know, I do sometimes read for folks who have a difficult dead, and the difficult dead will come and they'll be not like full of apology. They'll have kind of a half-ass apology. I'm curious like how that process started and how you I mean the book does such a beautiful job. Run, don't walk to the bookstore, your Amazon, whoever. Go get the book, friends. But in the meantime, that is such a tricky one, yeah.
It is. And I think it's also important to remember that the dead are dead. They can't hurt us anymore. But sometimes we don't feel safe to be angry at them until they're dead.
Right.
And sometimes they've really hurt us when they were alive. So I'll never forget sitting down with a woman who had been abused by a cousin when she was 4 years old, who is now dead. She's not responsible for forgiving him.
No.
No.
Absolutely not. In fact, it's important for her to express her rage and fury at him now that he's dead and for what he took from her. But I said, when you feel ready, let's sit down and let's make a list of 10 things this soul would have to do to make amends and to prove to you he was sorry, to prove to you he had atoned for his crimes. And so we sat there together and we made a list of 10 things, and we wrote this guy's name on the list. And I said, look, he may not complete this in your lifetime. So you'll pass this on to your children and your grandchildren. And this soul will not be forgiven until all 10 of these things have been achieved. Your gift to him is the gift of an opportunity to make amends. Within a week, the first 4 things on our list had happened.
Oh, Jill.
And that's such a great way of working with the dead. Yeah.
So she said, oh, suddenly she realized he gets it. We must never talk ourselves into forgiveness. The dead have responsibility, and we're going to want that. We're going to die. And we're going to go about something we've done in our lives. Oh, shit. Sorry. I didn't know. I didn't see. I didn't get it. And if we're given an opportunity to make amends, we're going to absolutely, I'd like to fix that.
That's really helpful, Perdita. I love that. I love both your delegation to the dead and like, but it's also this collaboration, right? Like one of my dear friends from film school came through the other day and talked to me about my YouTube channel. It's like, here's what we're going to do. And he was like full of direction. He was like, come on, babe. I mean, it was awesome because I'm one of my favorite people on earth, and he left very, very young. And so it's now, like you say, it's he's here and we're collaborating, and it's so different. So not to take away, I think you said that beautifully. It's like you miss your mom. You'd like to hug her on Christmas or whatever, like the physical body is so magical. So it's not to take away from any grief, but there is a new phase, I guess, it feels like, of development, right? And that.
Absolutely. And, you talked about your friend who died too soon. I often think, there are people who leave us very quickly, and we don't know what appointment they're on time for in their next life.
Oh,
I love that.
We just don't know, and, I have a student, she has, her daughter died when she was 11. And, I think that may be the hardest loss of all for a parent, right? To lose a child. And why do these souls come if they can only spend a little time with us? A miscarriage. Why does the soul spend just a few weeks in our body and then leave? Because like that woman who came to stand beside me and my son, they love us. They want connection. They want our threads to entangle with each other. And they want us to call upon them. Just because a soul is small, just because a life is small, doesn't mean a soul is small.
Right.
And your friend you knew in film school says, "Oh, we've got big work to do." Right? And my friend, her daughter who died at 11, because of her physical illness, she had a very hard time sleeping, and it was really hard for her parents. And they became masters of trying to get her to go to sleep. And I remembered this one night. I was having a bad bout of insomnia one night, and I thought, I'm going to call on her. And I called on her, and my cat, who never does this, hopped up on my chest, all 12 pounds of him, and he was like a weighted blanket on my chest, and I immediately went to sleep. And I told this mother about this. I said, I called on your daughter, and I had this experience. And she said, the one way we could get her to go to sleep is we used to take a big Bible and put it on her butt, and that would make her go to sleep for whatever reason that weighted her down. And I thought, oh, and now I've taken to calling on her to help me with sleep every night.
Oh.
And I've gotten to know this girl. I never knew this girl in life, but she's my patron saint of insomnia. And this is how the saints used to be made. They were made because people called on the dead and asked for their help, and they started to show up.
Yeah. And why wouldn't they want to help us?
They do want to help us. They all do.
But what happens when they can't get your attention? Can you tell us? I read in your Substack about your son.
Well, and maybe that's a thing to talk about right now around Halloween and this moment is that woman had to appear in bodily form to get my attention.
Yeah.
But once she had my attention, I learned to listen for her. And the dead have shown up for me in my room to get my attention, and I don't like it one bit. I have asked them to find small ways to get my attention. So I've begun to learn to notice when they're speaking very softly. So Richard Mello spoke very softly to me. He popped into my head. I could have ignored the fact he popped into my head, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Because I didn't ignore it, he didn't have to appear in my bedroom at 3:00 in the morning, which would have been no fun. And I think that the dead try to make noise to get our attention. And that can often be scary to us when they're shouting at us. Nobody likes to be shouted at. But, my children will do this. Like we're at a party and they can't get my attention. They're like, Mom, Mom, Mom. And they go, I jump out of my skin and turn around. And the dead are kind of like that.
Yeah.
They shout at us when they can't get our attention.
Yeah.
And I prefer when they speak quietly.
Well, can you tell the story of your son with
Sure, absolutely. So my son, when he was in college, had a pre-med moment where he thought that his mother was nuts. And all this dead stuff, right? And he was sort of feeling grumpy about it. But I have that, the whole wall of our dining room in between our kitchen and our dining room is just an ancestor altar. And it's shelves and shelves of photographs and images and statues. And the dining room and the kitchen are connected. And he was in one summer morning. No one else was in the house. It was still, hot, quiet, heavy day, not a breath of air. And he's making himself a sandwich in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, for no reason, every single photo and statue on the ancestor altar fell off with a clatter to the floor. And he leapt up to the ceiling, and he had prickles all over his body, and he was all freaked out, and he was scared. And then his next thought was, oh my God, Mom's going to kill me and blame me, and every photo's going to be broken. And he went over there, and not a single crack in any of the glass. Not one frame was broken.
Whoa.
And when I came home, he said, "Mom, what does this mean?" And I said, "It means they want you to start paying attention to them," which he has done ever since. It's a profound relationship to the dead. And they have really guided him and held him. And he has both my children have a very profound ancestor practice.
Well, I guess when they throw themselves at you, what else are you going to do?
It's so interesting. I'd been worried about him. He was living in a different city and he's in his 20s. And he'd had a friend from college who had suicided just after college. And it was just really heartbreaking situation. And so, but I found myself calling on his friend to protect him, to protect my son from despair, help him find his path, help him find his meaning. It's hard in your 20s, and he was headed into his, Saturn return, and that 27th year can be a rough one. And so I was just like, keep an eye on him. And he made a decision to move back home. Oh. And the day he moved back home, he was sitting in our living room and he said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. The person I've been calling on for help was my friend who'd suicided." Wow. I said, "I was calling on her too." And he said, I have a mass card from her funeral." And I said, "I'd love to put it on the altar." And he said, "Yeah, I'd like it on my altar too." And I said, "Well, let's find it. We'll make a copy of it, and I can have one and you can have one." And, then he was moving and he was getting back to work and he couldn't find the mass card and all the boxes. And one day he decided, "I've got to find it." And he pulls out the mass card. It was October 6th, and that was her birthday.
Wow.
And this is the way they speak to us through dates, through names, through synchronicities.
Yeah.
A song pops on the radio. I mean, we can't often use this stuff to prove to other people the dead are real, but we can encourage others to have the same experiences we've had.
Yeah. And be open to it and recognize it and celebrate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. My writing, since I started working through the dead, has transformed because I don't write by myself. I write with the dead. Tell me what to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me what to do. And I know that really good novelists are psychic, right? They're channelers. They're really good artists are psychic. Good musicians are psychic. Bob Dylan, I live in Woodstock, so we have a kind of religion around Bob Dylan, but people always misunderstand Bob Dylan because he used to get interviewed like, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I don't know." No, he was a channel. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm showing up and I'm listening and I'm saying what they're telling me to say. And that's all I'm doing. I can't take any personal responsibility for it.
Yeah. These little bodies, they can't take all the credit. Yeah.
No, we wouldn't take any credit. The people didn't understand it.
Perdita, there's a story in your book that is really significant to me. I'm a person who is very close to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you tell a story about one of the founders. Well, I'll just toss to you. I'll stop muttering. Can you share that?
Well, my husband and I are very, very, we have personal interests in 12-step communities, and we have spiritual interests in 12-step communities because they're quite radical spiritually. And, I was talking about the problem with priests and priestesses before, and I think one of the things that defines Alcoholics Anonymous is the absence of expertism. There are no experts. They're only alcoholics getting together.
Right.
And that lack of expertism, that circle of friendship, that circle of brokenness is actually really radical spiritually and so much closer to what I think that misunderstood magician Yeshua was trying to get at, and what was probably closer to what our ancestors experienced about spiritual experience. My husband and I have been studying 12-step groups from the inside out and the outside all different ways for a long time. We've always been, and I always had a funny thing because, Bill Wilson, who founded AA, fascinating person, really, who was doing his own channeling, by the way, who would always say, had a pretty profound spiritual experiences going on of channeling. And I had said to my husband, I lived in Dorset, Vermont, where Bill Wilson lived one summer when I was in college. It'd been a funny summer. I would be a theater major, and I was an acting intern one summer at a summer theater, and having a wild summer. Have a lot of fun. I still remember very fondly. My daughter in high school got accepted into a writing program, Breadloaf, and we were taking her up for her weekend or week at Breadloaf. And I said to my husband, hey, let's go to Dorset. It's this beautiful little New England town, and we'll go there and spend the weekend, and we can go to the Bill Wilson house. And he said, great. That sounds fun. I've never been to Vermont before. I've always wanted to go to Vermont. My husband's a Southerner. And we dropped my daughter off, and we're driving. This is the days before iPhones and Google Maps. And we have an actual paper map on our lap. And I'm yelling directions at him, and we're fighting as we normally do over directions, before the Google map. People don't know what they're missing.
Every couple. Yeah. So much new peace.
I know. And then my husband, now you can just yell at the phone. And so then my husband says, wait a minute, we're going to take a left up ahead at the Red Barn. I said, what? He said, there was no Red Barn. And then we came around this curve, and there's the Red Barn, and there's a left, and we took it. And there's going to be a general store up on the right. And I said, it was as if he was having a precognitive experience of what was just around the bend. It was very weird. He was very disoriented by it. It was a little unnerving for me, but we have weird experiences. So we wrote this one off. We went to the inn. We had our weekend. We had such a good time. We forgot to go to the Bill Wilson Museum. And we picked up our daughter and went home. Same thing happens the next year. She goes back to the program. We drive a different way to the inn. And again, we get about 15 miles from the town, and my husband is flooded with knowing about the roads. We get to the inn, we eat dinner, we have a glass of wine, we forget the experience. Third year. Now she's interviewing at colleges up in Vermont. And she stays with us at the end. We're going to go to the inn and spend the night, and then go to do her college interviews the next day. And we check in, and we get into our room, then we're eating our dinner, we're getting into bed. And a baby starts to cry in the room next door. I mean, inconsolably. And I'm praying to all my ancestors, I'm calling everybody I know. Be the pacifier for this baby. And nothing is working. So I go downstairs and I say to the desk clerk, could you give us a different room? My daughter needs to get her rest tonight. She has college interviews tomorrow. He says, there aren't any other rooms. It's fall foliage weekend. We're filled up. The whole inn is filled. I said, you must have another room. And he said, well, there's this old space above the old stables. It's a little funky. And I could make up a bed in there if you wanted. I said, do it. So we grab our pet bag, we put our suitcases all together, and we, I think it's 1:00 in the morning. We trudge out of the inn, and we go across the courtyard to this old funky stables. We walk up these rickety stairs to this, funky plaid couch and an old bed in this room. My daughter instantly goes to sleep on the couch, and my husband and I get into bed, and we begin to pray. And my husband starts to shake. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, every time I shut my eyes, I am going around this town on the roads. I can see every road. I could draw a map of this town and show you every road and every driveway. He said, I feel like I'm going crazy. And he looked at me and said, what kind of person knows every road in a town? And then he looked at me and said, oh my God, the mailman. And I had a moment of panic, and I'll tell you why. Because years earlier, when we'd moved to Woodstock, my husband, who's an author, is the editor of a Buddhist magazine, very successful on the workshop circuit, he came home one day and said to me, I think I'm going to apply to be a postman. And I said, what? He said, well, I could write poetry and walk all day, my two favorite things. And I said, Clark, this is insane. And so I finally kind of talked him out of it. And then this weird thing started to happen, which was everyone in our small town of Woodstock began to mistake him for the postman.
Oh, no.
And he doesn't look like the postman. And so we're in this room above the stables, and I look at my husband, I go, oh God, we're not going to have to do the postman thing again, are we? Like, oh no. And he said, no, Mark Whalen was the postman in Dorset. And Mark Whalen was Bill Wilson's best friend. And Mark Whalen was the postman in Dorset, and he taught Bill everything. He was 10 years older than Bill, and he taught him everything about philosophy and religion, and they talked about everything. And they talked about the Vermont Town Hall and what it meant to gather communally, and they talked about communism, and they had all these profound conversations that were the kind of foundation of AA in many ways, even more than the Oxford group. Bill, though, never got sober for Mark never got sober for reasons that are very complicated. I would need another hour to go into to talk about. But in any case, Clark gets online and looks up Mark Whalen. And there was a Life magazine article about him in the 1940s because he was the first postman to deliver the mail in a truck and not by horses. And until then, he had stored his horses at the inn in Dorset. And so we were above the stables. And we were in the very place where Mark had been all the time. And of course, he knew all the roads. And we went to Mark's grave. And my husband has a very profound experience happen to him on June 16th. And that, of course, turned out to be Mark Whalen's birthday. Mark Whalen died 9 months and 49 days before my husband was born. My husband was born, and his teenage mom, so he was mostly raised by his grandmother and her husband. His grandmother's name was Lois, and his grandfather was Bill. So he was born to Lois and Bill.
Bill Wilson's wife is Lois.
So to bring the long story full circle, now there's a lot more to tell you about that story, and it's in my book, and there's even stuff beyond that we've discovered since. And, we couldn't remember every day from third grade. If we did, it would break our hearts. It'd be too much. We'd be crushed under the weight of memory. We remember what we need from our past lives.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we need the memories of the trauma, the burnings. And sometimes we need the memories of the beauty, and we need the memories of the friendship.
Oh, gorgeous.
Oh, so gorgeous. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's just such an incredible, evidence-filled, profound story that illustrates, and you have many of those, of course, in your book, but I really appreciate you telling it. Unfortunately, we are getting out of time, which breaks my heart because I adore sitting with you, Perdita. You're just magical. I mean,
Yes,
I could sit all day, but people can, right? Because you have workshops and all kinds of amazing things that you do.
I do. I try to make this work as accessible to people as I can. So I teach workshops, all different kinds. I also have a newsletter that's both a free and a paid subscription. I try to be really generous with the free subscription. I want people. I'll tell you why I do this work, and I try to share it as much as I can. I want to be reborn into a world where everybody knows how to talk to the dead again, where everybody can do what you do, Sarah and Jane. I want to be reborn into a world that remembers how to remember the dead. And I want to be reborn to a mother and father who look at me and goes, oh my God, it's Perdita. She's back. So I never know who I'm talking to. I might be talking to my future mother and father.
True. Well, thank you for your beautiful efforts to create that world, because I want to be born in that world too. So thank you.
Maybe we can enjoy it when we're kids and teenagers and have fun with it and not feel like we have to hide. I feel like I was in hiding for so long.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to put it to whoever's in charge of these things that I want to be a teenager with you, Perdita. So
I'm feeling that very strongly. Can I totally am? Let's get up to some mischief together as teenagers. My husband and I pray to be reborn together as teenagers. It's going to be chaos, but
I love it. You're going to rock it out. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I love talking to you both so much. Thank you. Thank you for who you are in the world and everything you're doing.
Everybody go buy her book. It's so good. You can read all of these stories. There's so good.
More in the process and on Substack, and go find her, y'all. And I'm just, again, so happy to, the 5 people who don't already know who you are, well, now they do. So anyway.
There are a lot more than that, but thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Medium Curious is made possible
by Jane Morgan Editing.
Sarah Rathke made the amazing music. Mixed by Podcast Engineers.
And you can help Medium Curious by downloading the episodes
and following our socials.
And please subscribe to our newsletter on mediumcurious.com.
And the dogs under the desk in Hawaii are Kalea and Domino.
And Trixie in California.